Hey then, everyone. Thank you for joining in. It is 5 o'clock, so we are kickstarting this AFBE Leadership Talk Show. Thank you to my co-host Emma and to every special guest that we have on this show and the extremely wonderful panelists, the fine line of speakers that I have here with me. I want to say thank you. It's a pleasure to have you guys on this talk show. I look forward to a very exciting conversation and a lovely evening as well. So we're here. And today the theme of the talk is increasing female representation in leadership. And we will be exploring the enablers for achieving that goal and getting the panel's frank assessments on what is progress, what should progress actually look like. We would also talk about racial diversity as a necessary element for female representation. And we will also discuss the requirements on why corporate organizations should pay attention to this before or as they plan on their agenda on diversity and inclusion within their organizations. But first, let us start with introductions. So I will start from my left here. Carmen, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Roy and the rest of the panel. My name is Carmen Morris. I'm the Managing Director of Kenroy Consulting, which is a diversity consultancy business based here in the UK and supporting clients globally. My specialist area is race and race equality, although I do cover the whole spectrum of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Elaine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to be here. So my name is Elaine Galston. I've worked in the startup and entrepreneurial sector for probably 20 years now. I've been a CEO and a COO for 2 engineering companies, both of which were private equity owned, and one of which we took to exit to Schlumberger in 2016. I am part of a group called Investing Women, which was Scotland's first female-only angel investing group. So for them and for Scottish Enterprise, Barclays, and a variety of other organisations, I'm very involved with coaching, mentoring, training female startups and across a wide range of sectors. And I have also now started up my own company. So I am a female founder myself. So that's in the femtech industry. I won't go into that because it's pre-dinner as to what I actually do, but we can talk about it at the end if anybody wants to know. So I've seen entrepreneurship from all sides of the sector, and I've seen female representation on all sides, what's good, what's bad, and what desperately needs to change. So it's a particular passion of mine.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Craig.
Thanks, Roy, and I feel honoured to be part of such an esteemed panel. So my name is Craig Shanny. I'm the President for Operations Services for Wood across Europe, Middle East and Africa. I'm also the Chair of the D&I Task Group for OE UK, as it's now known, and I'm absolutely honoured to have recently joined the advisory board for AFBE. And maybe carrying on with Carmen's trend, my specialist areas are sport and music. So if anyone's got any sport or music questions, they'll come to me. Look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Craig. Finally, Nika.
Hi everybody, my name is Nika. I am chair of AFBE, and my side hustle is I'm a technical director at a company called WSP, where I manage a team of engineers across the UK and in India doing some fantastic work on transport telecommunications projects. And I'm really honoured, excited to be here amongst these esteemed league of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. And today, co-hosting with me is Emma Opara. Emma, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emma, as Roy's just mentioned, and I am a principal legal counsel with Centrica Storage Limited in my day job. And most of my spare time is spent volunteering with AFB in very different roles.
Thank you very much, Emma. So for just brief housekeeping rules, if you have questions and you want to chip in, please type your questions in the chat section and we will get to them as quickly as we can. So let's jump into this. So a report was published in The Guardian, which, if I may summarize, says that in the last decade, the number of women in the FTSE 100 board roles has risen from 12.5% to about 39%. And it says as well that women make up only 8 of the chief executive roles at the UK top 100 listed companies. Carmen, let's start off with you. Tell us about your take on this particular publication by The Guardian.
I found it quite disappointing, and there are several reasons for this. As you know, investments around gender diversity have been quite substantial since 2015. However, that investment hasn't necessarily taken diversity and inclusion into account. And that has been borne out by the fact that the Fawcett Society quite rightly said that while, you know, it's a good step, it's a step in the right direction for this increase in gender at the top levels, it also highlights the fact that there has been little in terms of diversity within the gender diversity space. I have been working in diversity and inclusion for over 25 years now, in fact, nearly 30 years. And I can remember the days when gender was synonymous with white and female. I'll give you a bit more of a background in that. Race has always been the part of diversity and inclusion that people have found the most uncomfortable. I was around in the days of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, working with the inquiry team, working with the Lawrence family, and working with the police after the murder of Stephen Lawrence when the inquiry reports came out. It's a very uncomfortable subject, and it has been traditionally led by white women for white women. Prior to the murder of George Floyd in 2020, all the conferences were 99.9% white women when it related to gender. However, since the murder of George Floyd, there has been an attempt that I personally think is a performative attempt to align gender with the racial part of diversity and inclusion. And I will explain that to you. As I said previously, I've worked in the field of diversity and inclusion for nearly 30 years now. And since the murder of George Floyd, when it was no longer fashionable to keep the gender diversity space white, if you like, the amount of approaches that I've had from these women who have been gatekeeping that section of diversity and inclusion has been astonishing. Another point that I'd like to make on the report that's been recently published is that 39% of women, there's been an increase of 39% of women at boardroom level, but these have generally been white people, white women. My take is the reason for this is that the gender diversity sphere has for too long been the preserve of white women who have supported the development of gender diversity with the leaders of organizations who tended to be white men. Therefore, I do not see how the results of the recent report are surprising to anyone. It would appear that it is white women who are working with white men to increase gender at leadership levels within organizations at the expense of the intersectionality within gender itself.
Interesting. So if I understand you correctly, we are in a situation where we have a majority of women who are progressing into leadership level being white.
Yes.
However, it doesn't even mean that they are actually progressing as much as they should be. There are still barriers that need to be overcome.
Absolutely.
Now, why would you say women of color are still struggling to find representation in corporate leadership level?
I think there are many reasons for this. Traditionally, corporate leadership has been the preserve of men and white men. When, well, prior to the murder of George Floyd, but definitely after the murder of George Floyd, yourself, the rest of the panel, and no doubt the people listening in this afternoon will remember that a vast majority of these large corporate organizations made their statements around diversity and inclusion and support for racial inclusion. However, if you are looking at the top tiers of the organization being traditionally white and not supporting race and racial inclusion, then necessarily, if they are challenged to become more inclusive, they will take the easy step, which is gender and white women. In other words, women who look like them, to thus reinforce the homogeneity at the top of organizations while ticking the box on diversity. Now, within these parameters, it is very difficult for Black and other ethnic women to even get a foot in the door when you look at it in that way.
So just going on from there, I'm going to throw a question to Nike. And I just want to know, Nike, would you say that companies, especially given what Carmen has just gone through and my own realization as a Black woman in the corporate field, I realized that there are many Black women like me who are in middle management, maybe not able to progress past that stage. So would you say, Nike, that companies actually trust female leaders of color? Can they trust us to lead their boardrooms, to lead their enterprises? Is that something that you can advocate for and say yes? Or do you have any questions around that yourself?
That's thank you, Emma. That's a fantastic question, actually. And I think the truth is, you know, essentially everything Carmen said is actually, people are more comfortable. People are comfortable with traditions. People are comfortable with what they know. I've always thought that the gender diversity space didn't belong to people like me, because I didn't feel like I really belonged there. And not because anybody had specifically said I didn't belong there, but I knew that I've always felt that there was a kind of I was the other. So even if I went into a discussion to talk about ethnic diversity, someone would straight away point out my gender because they could relate more to my gender. And I think that affects, I think it was Mavis that said there's a perceived level of incompetence if you're an ethnic minority woman. As a woman anyway, there's a perceived level of incompetence, especially in engineering. And plus add that to ethnic minority, there's even a bigger perceived level of incompetence. So regardless, it can be very frustrating, specifically within professions that are predominantly men. It can be very frustrating because you work just as hard as everybody else. And when the promotions come, if it is gender related, it's not you. And that's really disheartening.
Indeed. And in terms of the challenge to be inclusive, have you seen that the focus, this increased focus on D&I, are you seeing that this is actually becoming the reality of women of color who work in the spaces that you do or even participate in your sector?
I think there's a lot of performative approaches that are happening now. So there are lots of organizations very, very keen to say they're supporting, specifically gender diversity. So I remember years ago, I went to a conference and I said, it's really great that this organization is supporting diversity. And straight away, I was told that, no, we're only really focusing on gender diversity. And I thought, so, okay, I'm really confused now because I am an intersection of many, many experiences and not just my gender or my ethnicity. So I think that there is still a way to go in the way that we look at diversity. And I haven't seen so far, it'd be good to see a few more diverse women at the top of our profession in engineering, because when you find them, unfortunately, they're usually relegated to doing diversity, EDI related stuff. Whilst I know personally many technically competent women who could be in technical roles or leading roles within organizations outside of diversity. And yeah, so that is the issue, that even when you could be doing so much more, there are spaces that are still kind of seen as, this is outside of your remit, go and focus on diversity and inclusion. I've actually once been told by a manager, I know you're really good technically, but do you want to focus on the diversity thing? Because it might be that it will help you to progress your career.
It's tempting.
At which point I thought, maybe you should retire too, because I think you've been long enough in the industry to know that what you've just said is wrong. So I think there is a long way to go in terms of people really understanding why this is important, understanding why it's demoralizing, and understanding why a lot of people get to a particular point in their career and decide, this is not an industry for me. I'm never going to make it to the top. I'm going to go and do something else.
Okay. Thank you, Nika, for those points. So talking about female competency in engineering, Elaine, you have held senior executive positions within companies, whether it be a startup or an SME or an organization. And I know you've been clearly handled the engineering company, and you've dealt with men who are engineers, you've dealt with people who will claim they are probably more technically competent than you. However, you had the responsibility of driving that organization. You ran the company, you succeeded in the company, and generally I would say that you did pretty well. So tell us, how over the past years have you seen the role of women evolve, not just from a technical point of view, but to a corporate executive level within an organization or even SMEs?
Thanks for the question. Right, and yes, I did have to deal with 2 engineering companies which were predominantly male. And shockingly, even though I got the highest levels within both organisations, I was actually 8th best paid, and private equity owned by what was white males. So it was a very challenging growth to have myself, because I even thought that I was sitting at the top of the organisation, you felt incapable of challenging your own position at many times. But in terms of women, I'll take it generally within business, undoubtedly there are more women in business than there have ever been. If you take the figures from 2016 to now, they're more or less double, at about 32% of all businesses are female-led. There have been a huge number, and I hate the word initiatives, and I'm sure we can talk about it later on, a number of initiatives to look at why there aren't more women, especially in the likes of entrepreneurship and leadership roles. And there have been some very interesting articles that have come out, and some initiatives like the Alison Rose report and the Investing in Women Code that have come through from that. However, we are very, very far away from being in a positive position. As Carmen said earlier on, we've got 8%, or you said 8% of women in the FTSE 100. It's about the same 8% in the Fortune 500 as well in the US. Of those, there are 0 Black females out of that, and only 2 out of 41 in the US. So women are extremely far behind in all sectors, and Black women are even further behind. If you look at the reports that have come out in terms of, I look at it from a financial perspective, because I believe funding is one of the most fundamental aspects of getting women into business and successful throughout business. And the reports that have come out have shown that there's categoric failures at every level of funding, and very much startup funding. So I think the VC report, or sort of VC stats that came out recently, the amount of VC investment in, I think it was 2020, less than 1 pence in every pound went to female founders. And of that, 0.24% went to Black female founders. So, it's barely a statistic that's worth mentioning, because is that progress? So on the one hand, yes, women are being represented in a lot of businesses, but is it success? I think there's a lot we can debate around that. The one thing I hope is that going from 0 to 2, 0 to 8 is progress. It's frustratingly slow progress. But what I think it's more difficult to start something. And what I would challenge is, now that we've started, let's grab onto that and do something different for the future. Because the old sort of, male dominated, and Carmen is quite right, white female dominated, is not what the structure we need to replicate. We need to create a new structure to get more women and more Black women into business and into entrepreneurship.
Very well said, Elaine. Another question for you. So, from what it seems, there's a lack of investment in Black female businesses, or business, if I may put it that way. And that means that there's, in effect, a glass ceiling that actually does exist in the entrepreneurial space, as well as in the corporate space within organizations. What should companies do to break through that glass ceiling? How can we remove that hindrance that stops, women, Black women, from progressing into senior leadership level, but also affects their almost, should I say, self-esteem when they want to go into entrepreneurial roles? Because if there's no funding in entrepreneurial roles, or if they go into any business, then ultimately they're stuck, if I may put it that way. They can't move forward, and neither can they move backwards. They're just there.
Yeah, I think it's an exceptionally good point, and I'm sorry we still have to have these conversations. They're pretty disgusting, actually. And I think, you know, you talk about glass ceilings, and I have to say I don't think it's a glass ceiling at all. I think it's a concrete ceiling, and it's one that we've been chipping away at, and we've really struggled to break through as white females, but most certainly as Black females. You talk about what organisations can do, and this is something that I've been looking at, you know, a lot recently, and this is only my initial thoughts on this, but I talked about earlier on about the word initiative. And I think when people say they're going to put an initiative in place for diversity, or whether that's gender or race, they're missing the entire point. Embedding equality is something that you should start your company with. And clearly, most companies have not started there. We know that. So we have to retrospectively look and say, well, what do we need to do? And a lot of the initiatives that have been put in place have been put in place across the last 20 years, specifically. And I'll say that for white females, I think it's probably a lot less for Black women. But those initiatives that were put in place, has anybody gone back and actually said, how successful were they? Were they correct? And the world is extremely different today than it was 20 years ago. And a lot of the initiatives that organisations put in place with the best intentions are ones that are outdated, ones that are a kind of same as. They just pick up something from another organisation and they apply it. And they don't think, is this actually going to work? In addition, very few organisations are held accountable, and it is a tick box. And when it fails, they don't really look at it, or if they make marginal success, it's enough to say, hey, we did something. And I think organisations need help. I mean, you shouldn't, it's like criticise them for trying, you know, we've got to support these organisations to try, but I don't think a lot of them know how to approach diversity, because you have to approach it from absolutely every aspect, whether it's language, whether it's structure, whether it's the process of onboarding or growth. If you don't understand what females and white females and Black females need, then you can never put an initiative in place that's going to be appropriate. And you know, tiny examples I have of it, you know, I was on a program that was meant to help my business develop many years ago, not that many years ago, a few years ago. And as a female, they came out of the blue and said, hey, tomorrow we're all going to start somewhere at 7:30 in the morning. We've got this amazing opportunity for you. Now, my CFO, who was female, had 2 young children. You know, at the same time as I said to them, this is ridiculous, you can't do it, it doesn't work for being a mother. They asked if I would be on their gender diversity board, you know, and I was like, oh, but they didn't change, you know, they didn't seem to get it, because the fact that they had an opportunity in business overrode my requirement as a female, you know. So there's a huge amount that we need to do in terms of investment. I have a particular bugbear, and it's something that actually I'll probably come back and talk to many of you on this panel at a later stage, in that I'm working as part of a white female angel group. We want to stop that being white female. It's ridiculous. And I'm working with a number of Black founders and Black investors just now to say, how do we change this? But we have to actually challenge the overall structure of investing in founders. We have picked up what has been historically and still predominates a white male, mostly kind of upper class structure of men who invested in white male upper class structure men. And we've come along as female investors and picked up the same structure and just said, but we do it for females. And it doesn't work. I just passionately believe it doesn't work. And being a founder myself, working with founders, I asked some of my founders earlier on today, what's your experience as a founder going for investment? And the words I got back were horrendous, terrifying, horrific, mansplained, you know, utter bias against me. Female products aren't important. I was too young and too pretty. You know, could my husband front the business? Now, these are things that are happening right now 2 white females. You know, when I actually started to ask the black females, I wouldn't even begin to tell you what was said. It was horrendous. So there is a huge amount we can do. We have to, I think, stop and really look at what has been done and see is appropriate for the future, and really consider shaking it up and helping organisations properly shake it up and then be held accountable to what they actually deliver.
That's very interesting, especially when we're talking about shaking up organizations, creating new structures, and the discomfort of gatekeeping. And I'm going to put the next question to Craig. Obviously, you are a major voice in very major spaces, first within Wood, and then within the OE, Diversity and Inclusion Tax Group at the moment. And you've been championing diversity in that particular industry. Can you share your findings about the barriers that are being removed? Because I'm sure you started your task as a chair with identifying what needs to be done, but what has been done, would you say, in the oil and gas industry to foster the aspirations of women who need to move from one level to the next, number one, and number two, to just taking the undeniable impacts of the conversation about around race that's been going on in the last couple of years?
I think, thanks Emma. I think first of all, some fantastic dialogue already, and I only wish, and I'm glad you're recording it, Roy, I only wish we could get more people to hear it, because it's frightening and it's sobering. Some things around the level of discomfort in the topic, for me, just it blows my mind. If we've got that discomfort, how do we amplify that voice? I really like what Elaine said there around how successful are the initiatives, and you asked me that question, Emma, how well are the oil and gas industry doing? It's quite obvious from the statistics that have been discussed already by Carmen, not anywhere near good enough. Yeah, we are making progress, and I think that's undeniable, but it's miles away from being enough, and not quick enough, to be perfectly honest. And I really liked Elaine's soundbite of grab the momentum and do something different. So I think first, like all industries, oil and gas and energy industry, we've got a journey to walk in this space and undo some things in the past that haven't worked. And that's one of the reasons we created the D&I task group. It was under the OG UK banner, now under the OE UK banner, and it's to touch all corners of our industry, no matter how big or small the company is. And listen, there's no simple answer to the question. It's been discussed extensively already. The barriers facing women from minority ethnic backgrounds are complex and varied. I think one of the biggest and most significant findings in the D&I report we launched last year, and it's been talked about already, was the additional barriers facing minority groups with that intersectionality. And through, I think, both the survey and the following report, as well as through the engagements with the task group, we found that, like many elements of D&I, representation and allyship is a massive, it's everything really. It's massively required across the oil and gas industry, and across all industries. You just need to listen to the previous speakers. We talked a lot about role models, and we talked about champions and allies, and quite frankly, who are the people who are going to take a stand and face up to some of the really difficult to hear conversations today? Who are the people who are not just going to pay lip service to D&I agendas, initiatives, but actually demonstrate allyship and be vocal in the need for change? I think, let's be honest, in an industry that's largely white and largely male, as ours is, and as Nikki says, comfortable with traditions, I get really frustrated when I hear Nikki's example of D&I being the responsibility of the minority. And that's really why I'm so passionate about taking a stand. Being in the majority, I think the more people that we can get to understand the challenges and the opportunities that brings, because the stats speak for themselves. More diverse representation at all levels delivers better business results. So it's far away from just being a moral issue that we've got. It's a business issue. So it's only through that disruption and people willing to take deliberate and bold action that we'll be able to tackle the inequity of not only gender, but also that intersectionality of race as well.
And you know, obviously, this is a difficult conversation to have, as you said, the discomfort of, first of all, being the only man on this panel. Well done for being so brave. And obviously being a white man as well in this conversation. There are difficult discussions around unconscious bias, you know, and the gender bias is something that we cannot deny. It's undisputable that even a large percentage of women would prefer to see male leaders, not to speak of, you know, what the men think about female leaders themselves. So how can you, as a leader, how can you talk to how we can drive a consistent conversation to diminish that sort of bias against female leadership?
I think about the key is in the question, Emma. I think we need to accept that there is bias, and that's uncomfortable for people. We talked about it earlier on. It's uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me. I've had some great coaching, and see Ollie's on the call. I've had some great learnings through the unfortunate incident with George Floyd, etc., and just really listening and confronted my own unconscious bias, and I would never have considered myself to have any bias at all. And I think people need to recognise that exists. It absolutely exists. So I think it's in that conversation and in the education that we all have unconscious biases. We need to accept them, and only in accepting them are we going to do something about it. So the first thing we all need to do is be aware of that. And then I'd go as far to say that it's critical for leaders, especially leaders plotting succession plans for their teams and making appointments in key leadership roles. We need to be specific about action. We need to be specific and don't hide behind meritocracy and all of those things. We need to think about how do we evaluate roles. I think we're traditional in terms of how we evaluate roles, about having so many levels of experience and years in the role. And what about the diverse attributes that in some instances are far more valuable to that particular role than the technical competence or the years in the role? So I think it first comes with recognising those biases in all the processes, and then taking conscious action around inclusion. One of our sustainability goals is linked to that very, very challenge, and we've embarked to try and educate the whole organisation, but it's only a small part of the way. I think you then need to build on that and create the open space and culture for psychologically safe conversations to take place, such that people are able to share their views, share their feelings, make it uncomfortable, get people comfortable with being uncomfortable, and only then will we be able to move on. And I think that one of the other key aspects that was mentioned earlier on, even though we're making slight progress, one of the massive steps forward that we've made, and we've brought that in with some of the work we're doing in the D&I task group, is we're now starting to measure things much better, and really what gets measured gets changed, and really amplifying up the pace that we're not moving at is really important. And I would encourage everyone on this call and on the panel to continue to amplify that voice and make sure that the learning continues, because we have improved the level of conversation, we have improved the level of understanding, but the action is lagging, and only with that amplified voice are we going to get anywhere near where we need to be.
Thank you very much, Craig. It's very exciting what you're saying. We need to evaluate roles in line with diversity, and we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And more importantly, we need to speak out, because if we don't speak out, our voices wouldn't be heard. Now, I'm going to go to questions, or at least comments from our audience. One from Dushyant Sharma, which is quite interesting. He says, one of my mentees, a Black female, said to me last year, it's not the glass ceiling I worry about. It's the sticky floor holding me back. That's the first time I've heard that word, sticky floor. Such profound words, which gave me perspective I never saw before. And as with most things, once I understood the starting point, I was able to focus the help accordingly. Carmen, I'll come to you. I'm pretty sure you've heard all the phrases in line with diversity, inclusion,
Yes.
and race. So tell us about this sticky floor.
Well, I take that to mean that the person, Dushyant, has said that it's not the glass ceiling I worry about, it's a sticky floor holding me back. So I take that to mean that people of color will never mind the glass ceiling. I think it's about more of a systemic blockage in terms of progression. So I'm here, I'm at middle management. There's a glass ceiling, but who is that glass ceiling for? Is it for white women or is it for anybody else? So, I mean, to try and explain it a bit better, there's a glass ceiling we know for white women, but the sticky floor that is there for me keeps me in that position because that is where I'm allowed to go. So the glass ceiling doesn't even affect me because I'm stuck on the floor. I can't climb any higher. That's what I take it to mean. But I would love a definition of that if you're still on the line, Dushyant Sharma.
We don't normally do this, but Dushyant happens to be one of our advisors on the leadership team. And I would really like him to give us a perspective on that word sticky floor, simply because this is also the first time I've heard it. Dushyant, do you mind coming on and giving us a brief into sticky floors, please?
No, not at all. And I think according to what you've just said there, Roy, thank you for allowing me to crash the party, and apologies to everyone for disrupting your flow somewhat. But it was a perspective that was shared just in terms, and I think Carmen, you've understood it well in the way you described it, but it was also a notion of not being at the same start line for the race. You know, it's this notion of whatever social mobility factors may be, whatever conscious or unconscious biases that may have existed, this individual just felt, I'm not even at the same starting line. So, you know, forget about what I can see and the perceived blockage of getting through. I'm just not getting going. You know, there's just this perceived blockage that's kind of pulling me back. So I think you sort of captured it well in your understanding of it. And then, you know, just from what happened next, then you sort of understand that and then start to put in some action plans in place to unstick. And that's not an easy thing, and perhaps, you know, for another talk perhaps. But that was the perspective. I think it's just important for all of us to understand that there are some people who aren't even at the same starting line, let alone kind of getting going. And it's, you know, within our job as leaders to help them through that.
Thank you very much, Dushyant. Thank you for crashing the party. So, Nike, I would ask you a question. So there was a report that was published during the pandemic, and it said that female managers have done 60% more to provide emotional support to their employees than their male counterparts. And this was said because they were trying to paint a perspective on the reason why women burn out faster in the workplace. Can you give us a little bit insight into that?
That's thank you, Roy. That's a really good question, but that is my personal experience as well. And there are a number of scenarios throughout my career that has happened. One many years ago in a meeting, and a lady, a graduate, had just gone out to lunch and come back, and the comment was, "Oh, you've gone shopping again," in a room full of mostly quite senior male individuals. And as soon as she heard that, she was so distressed and broke down in tears. And everyone was looking to me to comfort her at that point. And I was really confused, because I kind of thought, hang on, I wasn't the one that said the really hurtful comment, and why am I expected to do this? And throughout my career, that has actually been my personal experience, that you are expected to care about the emotional health of everybody else, more so than your male counterparts. You are the one that is told, especially when it's perceived that you're maybe potentially an angry Black woman, that, oh, you know, this such and such, this has happened to this person, so we've got to be careful the way that we kind of ask them to do the job that they were supposed to in the first place. So my experience has been definitely that women are expected to be more than just managers in terms of technical managers or doing their role. They're also expected to be the agony aunt, the one that goes out and buys people lunch and biscuits and so on and so forth. And really, it does create a situation where you feel like you have a group of children and you are the one put in charge to take care of them, whilst your male counterparts can leave at whatever time they want and not be held accountable for people's emotional feelings. Now that's changing, because now we know about health and well-being, and that's starting to progress and that's starting to change. But my experience has been exactly that. And I think lots of women in similar positions would have had situations where they've been called upon to do the conversation, to have the conversation with someone that's having a hard time at work, because you understand them better, because they're female also. And you're thinking, I have no connection to this person. I don't know what they're going through. I've never experienced what they've experienced. Why can't you do it? So yeah, it's an added responsibility without any added value in terms of how you progress in an organization, and that needs to change.
Yes, you know, you spoke about the perceived level of incompetence, and you know that's something that I've sort of highlighted in my notes. And when you were just talking now, and you spoke about the other responsibilities that have no real value, but you're expected to deliver as a woman, you know, it made me realize that there is an expectation, there is a perceived level of incompetence, but at the same time, you are not always recognized for the real value that you bring, and therefore you are not promoted in accordance with whatever the standards are for these corporate designs to get to the next level. It's all, honestly, it's all just really starting to come together. But I do have a question for Elaine, especially since you spoke about creating new structures and you asked us the question, what do we need to do? Now, there is something in the chat that's just come up and someone's asked here, I'm going to read out the entire comment. Ami has said that he worked for a progressive FTSE 100 organization that's now put a target that's 45% of the PLC board to be of a female gender. Now, despite bringing it up with several leaders of that organization, they were reluctant to put a target on diversity representation on the PLC board. So Ami's asking, what can or should be done to educate these PLC board members to include diversity at board statistics? And I'm going to add to that, you know, Craig mentioned that we need to speak up, but then the question is, who needs to speak up? Obviously, there's the ally, and then there's the person who's actually affected by the lack of inclusivity. So, Elaine, I don't know if you have any answers for Ami there.
I'm probably going to, I could give an answer, but it probably won't be the polite one, if I'm honest.
Fair that.
I think if a board is refusing to put a target on diversity, then I question what Ami's doing working with that company. I would quite frankly move on. I think in this day and age, to turn around and say, no, I'm not going to consider that as a level of importance is utterly shameful. And I can only imagine his company are lucky that people aren't taking to social media to complain about it. But on the other hand, you can also say some sort of, you know, drastic movement like that doesn't help that board understand their feelings. So that would be my gut reaction. I don't want to, you know, strangle them, quite honestly. But, you know, continued education, I think you mentioned allyship. I think there has to be given the reasons why you're looking at diversity has a positive impact on the company, why it is incredibly important. If you are going to encourage your employees to have a successful and happy career with your company, then you have to be representative of everybody within that company. You can't say, whether it's sticky floor or glass ceiling, we'll keep you at this level and we won't try and help you, support you, encourage you as the best person for the job to get to a different level, i.e. the board. I would wonder why they simply don't want to look at this. You know, so I think, as Craig said earlier, there's no easy answer to this. I think it depends on who the company is, who the sector is, who the person that perhaps has said that. It may not be representative of the board, that one individual, that may be that one individual's belief. So I would continuously challenge that and try and show why this is utterly wrong, and that they need to rethink that attitude. Because if they're thinking that about diversity, then things like gender or any other aspect are not going to be given true reference. They are genuinely not truly looking for equality within their board at any level, and that certainly won't be going through the rest of their company. So I may stick in there, please try and educate them, reference any documents, any language you can, and speak to as many other organisations that you can that can support you in your position of educating your board. There are a lot of organisations that can give you a wealth of information to support you to do that, not just the big stick approach, which I would like to take somehow. I hope I can't give you a full answer. I wish I could, but I hope that's helped in some way.
No, it has been, absolutely. Sorry, Roy.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Elaine. So just being conscious of time, I'll take one question from the chat group, and I'll throw one question to the panelists and we round up. So Leslie has said, I feel education will be a key vehicle for increasing female representation. There is a lack of awareness and empathy from middle managers and senior leaders about the challenges faced by women in the workplace. Should there be mandatory training? I'm throwing this out to all of you.
For me, I think there should be mandatory training. I mean, there's lots of types of training that an organization can access to support them to think around diversity and inclusion, what it actually means. I mean, I know that apologies for this, I know that my colleague Chris has put in the chat around unconscious bias training, and how that can support leaders within organizations to look at the issues and things that they may be doing that they are doing unconsciously. And I agree with that. It can be a useful first step to start to look at these issues. However, it must go much further than that. They must be looking at legislation. They must be looking at systemic issues, as well as the personal issues, as well as their personal understanding, so that they can start to embed diversity as a whole in terms of gender, in terms of intersectionality, which is extremely important. There was a question there about targets. Yes, by all means, set targets. Organizations and leadership needs to be accountable for diversity and inclusion. It's not simply putting a statement on your website or some images of Black and brown people or Black and brown women. It's about being accountable for driving forward those results. So those are some things that organizations can do if they are authentic about driving forward gender diversity within that organization. There's absolutely no excuse not to do that.
Can I just answer that, Roy?
Yes, Greg. Yes, Greg, please.
Because I think Carmen's spot on. I think absolutely training is required, mandatory or otherwise. But that's only a first step. It's what happens next. It's how you embed that, how you change the culture. I think we've already heard today the traditions and cultures in workplaces are deep rooted, and it's really taking targeted action and being specific about that action and being authentic about that action, to Carmen's point. Because I think only then do you start really looking at, right, so how do I achieve that? And then you deepen the understanding of what the challenge is and where the opportunities lie. And I think creating a culture where there's a greater understanding beyond that training, to talk about the training, to talk about the issues, to talk about things that are happening in society on an ongoing basis, really embeds that and changes the culture. And interested in the comments about the focusing on the board. Absolutely, that's one thing, and the direction needs to come from the top, from the board and the exec management teams. But we more than that, we need to address at every level within our organisations, gender and race, and bring through much more talent than we are doing at the moment, and give people the opportunity, to Dushan's point, make sure that there isn't a sticky floor, and if there is one, then people have got tools, mechanisms, allies, role models that will help them remove it, but will also give them the courage to do it themselves. So I think there's many layers to this, and I think it's happening to see some progress, but it's not anywhere near enough yet.
Especially since we need to start thinking about the incoming workforce. You see, it's one thing to think about the more traditionally minded workforce, which I suppose a number of us in this call, I'm going to use my age as a determining factor here, but yes, we are of a certain mindset, but there is going to be a new talent group that's going to come into different industries, and they need to be accepted. They need to be welcomed. They need to be able to join organizations and feel comfortable, or else they will leave. They will not be as loyal as probably the previous generations were. So it's definitely something that has to be fueled down always from top to bottom. But Nikki, sorry, just thought you might want to have some comments given this.
I just wanted to say absolutely, it's so important that companies take this seriously, like health and safety. I think someone put that in the comments as well. Take it seriously. If we took diversity and inclusion as seriously as health and safety, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So I'm just conscious of time here. And for me, from what I've heard, it needs to be a top-down and a bottoms-up approach to change the culture within the organization. And we all need to be speaking. So that means it takes a collective effort of both white and Black to be able to effect change. And when I say Black, I also mean people of color. So not just, so we're talking about brown and every other color. We all need to be working collectively to be able to change that culture. We need to spread the information. And like you said, we need to get comfortable with speaking about uncomfortable conversations and having uncomfortable conversations. So a lot of progressive talk has been made here, and I'm certainly very excited. So this brings us to the end of this leadership talk. Before we close, there's something I would like to say. So within the AFBE leadership team, we have been working for the past 2 years to create a program which we've tagged Transcend, and Transcend is live. So for anyone who is within that middle management, senior engineer role, and you have a passion, you see yourself progressing into executive leadership role, but you don't know what to do, or you have tried in the past, you have been shut down, and now you just feel you would stay invincible within the organization and just do your bit, do your time and go home. Transcend will be the course for you. And so we would like you to come. It's not a full training, but it's a place where we want to inspire each other. So it's a course that is driven by the participants. It's a program that is driven by the people who are attending. And you would certainly get to meet the likes of Dushan, who just spoke, who are mentors on this particular Transcend program. So if it's of interest to you, please take a look. I think at the chat group, my colleague would have posted it there. Click on it, open it in your browser, read about Transcend, understand what we're trying to achieve, and also take part in the Transcend program. And also last but not least, we have the AFBE Live Conference, which is launching in April. We have a whole team who have been dedicated, working tirelessly. And when I say tirelessly, I mean WhatsApp messages flying about in 2 a.m. in the morning, trying to make this work. And so far, we've had an incredible host and beautiful line of participants, speakers. There's competitions for entrepreneurs to encourage entrepreneurs. I believe some of the speakers here on the group will be coming in as well and participating in the AFBE Live. So I would encourage you all to please sign up for AFBE Live to be happening in London. It's a one-day conference, and we will all get to meet, have conversations, and of course, have a lovely dinner at the end of it all. Again, thank you very much, Carmen, Craig, Nike, Elaine. You guys have been fantastic tonight. And I think if there's anyone who's come here, you're leaving here with a clear-cut understanding of what needs to be done. And hopefully, all things being equal, we would keep voicing out, we will keep speaking out, and eventually there will be a massive change in the industry as we strive to see more diverse women and more women in general in executive leadership positions across the UK and across the globe as we progress. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Emma, for co-hosting, and everyone who's been able to attend. Thank you very much. It's been lovely having you guys in this talk event, and we would see you next month where we have Professor Indibisi Ikikwe, who will be joining us all the way from Silicon Valley as we talk about his life from the village to Silicon Valley. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.